This is a video to accompany my cover of the last almost 3 minutes of Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which I learnt in meticulous, maybe ridiculous detail from the isolated bass track of the original recording. And it's just a chance to go through some of the finer details that are in the track that might be easy to miss. And it does include a few of the idiosyncrasies of Steve Harris's playing, which I find are sometimes missed by bass players covering his parts. So we're starting off with this part. And what I want to point out there is one of the things that Steve does all the time, which is that when he changes position on the neck or changes from one string to another, he will very often include an open string. So in this case, I'll play this slowly and I'll emphasize the part that I'm talking about. It goes like this. There is that open E string in there. And it's something he does, I think, because it just allows him to make a smoother transition between positions or between strings. And it does just almost leave a little breath in there so that it doesn't feel like the whole thing is filled up with notes. So then we come to the little odd time section, this part. Now, when you listen to the track, the full track, you will hear some movement in there. All of that comes from the guitars. Steve does just go between that F sharp and C on that whole thing, except for on the very last one, he does play an E. So he plays... So one thing I'll just mention is it's quite unusual for Steve to be actually riding along on the C in this position on the E string. As we all know, he plays a lot on the A string and he'll usually be down here for the C. But I think because he's chosen to play the F sharp riff on the A string for a bit more low end, a bit more punch, and everything's going by quite quickly, he stays in that position for the C. And I have looked at a few clips of footage of them playing this live to check all the positioning of the different parts in this section. So then we're back to the initial riff again, that one, and again there's an example coming up now of an open string, because at the very end of this phrase, which normally would finish, Steve includes an open A at the end instead of the E, because he's then transitioning down to this position. So now we have one of Steve's beloved Jethro Tull-esque twiddly bits, and there are a few points to note in this one. If you listen to the original recording, there might be a bit more going on in this than you think. It's quite note heavy. So I'll play through it and try and mention each thing as we go. So we start off with the... So note that he does play that F sharp 3 times. It's not just a held note. And again. And then twice on the C sharp. And then it's not twice on the E, but it's an E and a G sharp. So I'll play the ending part again. Back again. Now there's a little anomaly now, which I suspect is a mistake. I don't quite know why this note is in there. If you listen to the album recording very carefully, you can hear it. But Steve, on this one, goes... So he plays that D in there. And you have that G sharp again instead of 2 E's. So we're now back to the first riff, but this time we're playing down in C sharp. And the open E string is included again, so we have... Now coming out of the end of this part, again there's an open string, because we're back to the twiddly bit. And this time Steve's on the A string, so the part that would have ended on the B, he ends on the A. And then goes back to the... Now this time, this one, twice on the E. And ending again on that E, G sharp. So we're back to the C sharp riff again, and at the end of this section is another thing I wanted to talk about that's a characteristic of Steve's playing. It can be tempting when you're covering his stuff to just gallop away through the whole thing, pump away through the whole thing and fill everything with notes. But Steve quite often doesn't do that. He will leave a note or two off the end of a measure to leave a bit of a space, again sometimes if he's transitioning to a different position. So having just talked about the twiddly bit, which is absolutely full of notes, he will sometimes leave stuff out. So for example, at the end of this section we have the and he goes and he stops there and goes up to this next part. Note the staccato nature of those last three notes. He cuts those off quite sharply. Then we're back into now this time he goes so there are a couple of spots in there where he plays those three F sharps and cuts it off. So the very last part of that phrase, before we go into the end section of the track, which I think is just glorious, he plays those three cut-off notes, and then he plays the F sharp 6 times. And he holds that last one, so the whole thing, as I was talking about before, isn't just full of notes all the way through. There is a slight pause in there. So as we're getting towards the end of the track, we might call this the 8th note section. It's just a really majestic, really affecting piece of music, I think. Maybe something to do with the fact that all the different parts so far have moved around in terms of root notes from section to section. Now he stays on the F sharp, and it really seems to make a statement, and he plays it with such intent. It really is fantastic. So this part happens 4 times, and the first, third and fourth time essentially are the same. There are some differences on the second time round, but I'll go through it and just point out a few things. So we have so what you might have noticed there is, again, we have Steve leaving some space. So he doesn't just fill the whole thing up with eighth notes. We have there's a slight slide there. And again they're going up to the E. So that's the first time round. The next time round we get one of Steve's characteristic open A strings. And then there's a slide up to the E. And then we carry on through with 2 more, as they were the first time. So as we come into the very last part, we have some more examples of Steve leaving notes off the end of a measure, just to leave a little bit of space and allow himself time to move around. So at the end of that F sharp 8th note section, he does just that. We've come back off the he stops there. Then we're into this chord, stops, so he does cut that C sharp off there again to give himself time to get down to play that E power chord. We carry on, stop, now I'll just mention that part there because you might expect him to go, and indeed if you look at some live footage he does do that. In the studio, for whatever reason, at that particular moment he didn't play the chord on the D. So at the end of that D, as he's established already, we have the stop before we back up to the C sharp. Was helpful if you need to learn this part, and if you are learning any of Steve's other parts with Iron Maiden, always listen out for those open strings that he does put in between changes. As I mentioned, they occur frequently. They're a real characteristic of his playing, as is the fact that he doesn't fill every measure up with notes from very beginning to end. He will leave a bit of space in there. So it's always worth listening out for those if you are fussy enough to learn the parts with ridiculous accuracy. Thank you.